Sometimes we feel that if we were not born, nothing would have changed in the world. It's as if we don't have much influence on the people around us, our country, and even more so on the fate of humanity. But let's conduct a hypothetical experiment and find out whether the world would really be exactly the same without us as it is now. Let's imagine that we resurrected all of our ancestors and lined them up in chronological order, from our parents to Neanderthals and beyond. Let's walk along this chain. What will our Stone Age ancestors tell us? How many generations will be able to understand our language? And what awaits us at the end of this chain? Before us are hundreds of generations of people, our distant relatives. How far can we go before we stop understanding each other? In fact, the fifth person in line will think that you have offended her and may even punch you in the nose. If you say something to her about YouTube, bloggers, or the internet. For an English speaker, the 30th relative in line would be speaking in a confusing mixture of Norman and English, and to communicate with the 50th person, you would have to learn Old English. The 100th person in this chain would already be speaking one of the extinct languages of the Celtic group. If you are proficient in classical Arabic literary language, you will have no problem communicating with ancestors up to the 65th person in the chain. But you will need Aramaic. If your ancestors spoke Chinese, in order to reach the age of 70, you will need to brush up on ancient Chinese. It sounds logical, but in practice, it is much more complicated. And for those whose native language is Spanish, I have bad news. You will have to learn colloquial Latin, Andalusian dialect, Arabic, as well as Sephardic language. So lucky. If your ancestors spoke Ukrainian, problems will arise as early as the 50th person. They will only understand Proto-Slavic, the common ancestor of East European languages. The 150th relative will greet you in Proto-Indo-European. You can respond to them in Sanskrit, and they will understand. This person stands just 300 meters away from the starting point of your journey, and they lived at a time when people did not yet know about such material, like iron, and about such a thing as writing. But here I have bad news. You won't be able to talk to the 240th relative anymore. Science knows nothing about his language. But let's move on to the person with number 2500. This ancestor is no longer like you at all. One of the few people who survived after the eruption of the ancient Toba volcano. Most anthropologists believe that it was the volcanic winter 75,000 years ago that caused the human population to decrease to 2,000 individuals. It turns out that 7.5 billion descendants would have come to visit this 2,500th person in the chain on vacation, because he is the great-great-great-great-grandfather of all modern humanity. If every person on Earth lined up their ancestors in a chain, we would all meet here, right? Where in the chain of generations is our common ancestor? If we look back very far, the first Homo sapiens who appeared in Africa were our common ancestors. They spread to other continents in waves. The last and most massive of which occurred 50 to 70,000 years ago. All these people who survived and left offspring are our common relatives, and I am your 100,000th-year-old brother. But most likely, we won't have to look so far into the past. In 2004, a group of researchers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology created a mathematical model that allows us to find our closest common ancestor. And it turned out that this person lived only about 3,000 years ago. If we go back to our chain, this person is number 100. All the chains of people living on our planet today will converge to this individual. But that's not all. If we narrow down the territory and look for the closest common ancestor, for example, for the inhabitants of Western Europe, it will turn out to be a person who lived only 1,000 years ago. And they are only the 33rd in the line of ancestors. We can continue. If we take a specific country, for example, Sweden, it is possible that the closest common ancestor of the Swedes was born around the year 1500. Everyone watching this video right now is, to some extent, related to each other. This mathematical model also works in reverse. In 3,000 years, one of us will be the common ancestor of all people, living in the 5th millennium. But let's return to our past. What if we go further along the chain of our ancestors? Whom will we meet there after humans? Let's start with the fact that the ancestor numbered 7,000 will belong to a different species. This is Homo erectus, a walking human. Its brain is much larger than that of its predecessors, but this is still not enough to experience complex emotions or, for example, to be concerned that each day is similar to the previous one. Let's move on. You can shake hands with the Greek Opithecus. He is considered the last common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees. Here we say goodbye to the apes from which we originate and see who else was among our ancestors. Behind the Grecopithecus stretches a rope of creatures for kilometers, which are becoming less and less similar to us. For example, this Archicebus. It weighed only 30 grains. It lived in the territory of modern China approximately 50 million years ago. Not tired yet? Let's walk a few more kilometers and look at the Purgatorius. It is considered the ancestor of all primates. His species existed at the same time as dinosaurs. And while you were looking at Purgatorius, we reached our destination. At the end of the chain of ancestors on the seashore stands Tiktaalik. This, in principle, is the first creature that could stand in our understanding of this word. The chain of our ancestors has traveled a path of 380 million years, from clumsy fish to the pinnacle of creation, an office worker. But not everyone was so lucky. If you look around, you can see many neighboring chains that have been broken off, failures or not. For example, somewhere opposite your third relative, a neighboring branch is broken off. It is closed by Alan Turing, known for being portrayed by Benedict Cumberbatch. But he was also one of the cryptographers who deciphered messages encoded by the German Enigma machine. Information obtained by Turing and British intelligence services helped the Allies win military campaigns, save thousands of lives, and possibly change the course of the Second World War. Thus, Turing may have ensured the survival of your chain. In addition, your family took care of your kind, specifically those aunts you didn't like in childhood and cousins you saw once every few years. Many of our ancient relatives, of course, left descendants, but still helped this chain not to break and reach you. And what if something had gone wrong in the history of our ancestors? If something had prevented amphibians from coming ashore, at some point, life would continue only underwater. Then evolution would have left us with appearances, for example. Yes, about every species. And if the ancestor of these primates, Purgatorius, did not survive in a world with dinosaurs, then we would have had to evolve from pterodactyls, and humans would have had a bonus in the form of a curve. Or what if people decided not to go anywhere tomorrow? To fit on one continent, we would have had to become smaller. And if Turing had chosen a different university and not become a mathematician and cryptographer, how would the Second World War have ended then? No, it has gone too far. Subscribe to the channel and write me in the comments your versions of what could have gone wrong in human evolution.